Well, today I'm going to continue the series that we've been talking about, that we started last week, talking about guardrails. And the beginning of this is going to be a little bit somber because I'm going to be telling a little bit of a real, genuine story here. The sermon I'm talking about this week is, it's called, the topic is Speed Kills. Speed kills. And I want to share a story that happened a couple years ago here in our area. It was 2023, and there was a night I was driving a field trip. We were going over to Banks County for a football game, and we were on the way back, and we drove through this one intersection on, it's 985, but it changes names after it gets through Gainesville, so I can't think of what it is, but it's over by Lula where you cross the highway there. And about 15 minutes later, there was an accident at that intersection. A woman was driving in her car with her two kids in the back seat, and there was a guy on the highway doing, the police said the speeds were in excess of 150 miles an hour. He had a Corvette, and they said he was doing over 150. He came up so fast, she didn't even see him. He hit the car, and both cars were instantly disintegrated. There was no survivors in it. Everybody was killed instantly. And it was the wife and the family of a Hall County Sheriff's deputy. And one of my coaches on my bus knew the family. And so we're on the way back to school, and all of a sudden they're getting a text that this accident had happened and that they were all dead. And it was horrifying. They found out later that they did some autopsies, and the driver of the car had very high contents of alcohol in his system. And they said it was at least, just by the debris field, there wasn't anything left of the cars, but he was doing at least 150, maybe even pushing 200 miles an hour out there. And so today, like I said, it's a little bit of a somber story, but I want you to understand that speed is absolutely deadly. And in that case, it was physically deadly, but in a spiritual manner, speed kills too. Speed can be really, really dangerous. When we start doing things too fast, when we start doing things in the wrong way, it leads to disastrous outcomes that are just as deadly as those cars in our spiritual life. Because what we got to understand is the decisions, the choices that we make now last for eternity. And doing things wrong causes major, major problems. So one of the first things I want to talk about here today is that sometimes when we get going too fast, we don't do things the right way. We don't do things the right way. In fact, in my house, there's a piece of furniture that I can't, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus right now because I can't remember who put it together. But I know that somebody in our house put it together, and they did one of the panels backwards. And so you can't see it from the outside. I thought about going back and reassembling it, but I'm like, you got to take the whole thing apart. And the only way you see it is if you open it up. But on the inside of it, right where you're looking at, there's an unfinished panel, and the finished panel's on the other side. Because somebody didn't quite do it the right way, so they got going and they didn't quite read the instructions, and it was too fast and it wasn't right. And so I don't know if anybody else has ever done anything like that when you were, especially if you get some of those ones that have 50 million pieces, and then you get to the end and you realize, oh man, I did that one wrong. And then you're like, do I go back and redo it, or is it good enough? But when we go too fast, we don't do things the way that we are supposed to. And I want to take some areas today to show you how going too fast when we don't do them right, some different areas where we cause problems, where speed causes problems. And one of them, the first one I want to talk about, is speed leads to bad choices. When we're going too fast, we make some bad choices. And there's a story in Judges chapter 11 that I think really does a really good job of showing this. I'm going to set a little bit of a background for this story because this is probably one of those judges that you may not be real familiar with. But it's a guy named Jephthah, and he was actually kind of started off as a little bit of a bad guy. But all of a sudden, these bad guys are coming in and raiding and stuff, and everybody shows up and says, Jephthah, we need you to lead us so that you can help us fight off these Ammonites. And so Jephthah eventually decides to do it. Well, in verse 30 and 31, it says this, and Jephthah made a vow before the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Flop down to verse 34. When Jephthah had returned to his home in Mizpah, Who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sounds of tambourines? She was his only child. Except for her, he had no other sons or daughters. The Bible goes on to tell the rest of the story about what happened after that. And, he told her what he had vowed to God. And she said, God, well, Dad, just let me have some time just to mourn with my friends. And she goes off and she mourns with her friends. So here is a perfect example of how being impulsive and making a quick, rash decision can lead to a horrible, horrible decision. He says, okay, I'm going to do this. And God, whatever, if you give me this victory, the next thing that comes out of my house whenever I come home, it's going to be yours. I'm going to sacrifice it, and I will give it to you. Now, there's theologians have some different views about what happens here. If you go back and you read the book of Leviticus, which will probably put you to sleep before you get to the end of it, but at the end of it, one of the things they talk about is how you can sacrifice or dedicate your children or your servants to the Lord, and it says that you give them into the service of the Lord, and they go in and to work in temple. So there's some theologians that think that what actually happened was she was dedicated to the Lord at the temple and ended up spending her life working at the temple. But others talk about the fact that this guy really wasn't necessarily a godly man. He knew who God was, but he didn't know God. So they say that he actually did take her and sacrifice her, which was pretty common in some of the surrounding areas, the communities that they live within. And so, but either way, one of the things the daughter said is she wants to have some time to mourn the fact that she's never going to have children, because whether she goes into the temple service or whether she is literally sacrificed, she's not going to be able to, she doesn't get married and have children. All because this guy was impulsive and made a quick decision and said, God, if you give me the victory, I'm going to give you this. And so it cost him his only child. And so because of that, his lineage comes to an end right there. There was no one left to remember him. The Bible is full of people making impulsive and stupid decisions. Probably one of the most famous is a guy named Esau. He had a brother named Jacob, and one day he's coming home. He's been out working all day, and he's famished. I don't know if you've ever been out working all day, and you've come home, and you're like, oh, man, I need some food. Well, he came in, and he was starving because he had been out working all day. And here Jacob has a bowl of soup. Now, it wasn't like a filet or, one of those really great New York pizzas, or anything. It was a bowl of soup. And he looks at him and says, man, give me that soup. And Jacob says, well, I'll give it to you, but only if you give me your inheritance. And he says, oh, man, I want that soup. I'll do whatever you say. Give me the soup. And so for a bowl of soup, he gave over his inheritance. All because he was hungry. At our last church, whenever there was one time, this is several years ago, a group of us guys went to see a football game down in Tampa. And the pastor brought his son. His son's now like 30-something years old, but at the time he was like 11 or 12. And we were going into the football game. When we came out, his son was leaning on him saying, Dad, feed me, I'm starving. And he was like begging him to take him somewhere to eat. That was Esau. He's like, Dad, feed me, I'm starving. And so because of his impulsiveness, he made a huge mistake and gave away his inheritance. Another man in the Bible, a guy named Samson, made an impulsive decision because he loved a girl. And when she said, tell me your secret, he said, well, if you just cut my hair, I won't have any strength. So he ended up with the worst haircut in the world. Sometimes you think I get a bad haircut up here. He ended up with the worst haircut in the world because not only did it cost him his hair, it cost him his strength, and it cost him his eyes. I mean, that was a pretty costly haircut. All because of a bad choice, a hasty decision. In the moment, he just made a choice that cost everything. I'm sure you can think of some times in your life when something's come up and you've like made an impulsive decision and later regretted it. Going too fast, making too quick of decisions leads to the next thing is mistakes. Speed leads to mistakes constantly. In 2 Samuel, the 6th chapter, there's a really great story here of when David is taking the Ark of the Covenant, and he's taking it to Jerusalem from the home where it had been sitting for years, it had been sitting in this home, and he's taking it to Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to read to you just a little portion of this, but if you got the handout there, I have the whole area, the whole passage there. You can take that home and read it, because it's an interesting story, because when you just read this, you don't understand exactly what's happened. But in 2 Samuel 6, verses 6 through 7, it says, when they came to the threshing floor in Nacon, Uzzah reached out and he took hold of the ark of God, because the oxen had stumbled, and the Lord's anger burnt with Uzzah because of the irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. So what happened here is the Bible says they put the ark on this wagon, they're taking it from this house, and they're going to Jerusalem with it, because David wants to bring the ark where it needs to be at in Jerusalem. So they put it on the wagon. They're walking it down through here on the road, and the wagon hits a bump. It hits a bump, and it starts bouncing, and it looks like the ark is about to fall off the wagon. So this guy reaches over, and he's to stabilize the ark, and the moment he touches it, he dies. And when you're reading that, you're like, wow, that seems cold. God, why would you do something? He was trying to do something good. He didn't want the ark to fall down. He didn't want it to hit the ground. He didn't want it to be smashed. But the problem is that they weren't doing it the right way. You see, if you go back into the book of the law, where God lays out how you're supposed to do this in the book of Exodus, he tells them how they're supposed to move the ark. And one of the big things is the ark doesn't go on a wagon. God specifically made poles that run through loops on the ark, and it's supposed to be carried on the shoulder of priests. On the shoulders of priests. They're supposed to walk it. Now, this guy Uzzah wasn't even one of the priests. So they weren't doing it the way God said to do it. And because of that, somebody died. When we don't do things the way God tells us to do, we make mistakes. God spelled out exactly how the ark was to be moved. And then the Bible goes on and says that David got angry with God. He said, God, why did you do this? And basically, God said, look, I laid out the way that you're going to do it. Do it my way. There's no other way. Do it my way. If not, you make mistakes. So the Bible is full of the stories of people who make impulsive decisions. They do things the wrong way. They don't do it the right way. God has laid out the way that we're supposed to do things, and so they start up with doing things their own way, and it creates problems instead of doing it the way that God prescribed. God lays out how we are supposed to live our lives. But when things get going crazy, when life gets going fast, sometimes we don't do things the right way. Now, one of the things that's kind of a stereotype about guys is that we don't read instructions. You ever hear that? Guys get like something they have to put together, and the first thing they do is they pull the instructions out of the box and throw those away and say, I can do this. And they start, what was that? Because we threw them away already. We pull them out and they start putting them together. And inevitably, when you do that, at the end you end up with a whole bunch of like little pieces that are left over here, and you're like, I don't think that goes to anything. They sent extra parts. It doesn't matter. And then eventually when you do that, like some things you can get away with not doing it right, but other things, like a kid's toy, they start riding the bike down the road and poof, and it falls apart, and it doesn't work because we didn't do it the way that it was laid out. God lays out things for a reason. Back in 2017, I decided I was going to start becoming a bus driver. I was leaving my IT job, and I was going to become a bus driver. I had been driving for 30 years at this point, so I knew exactly what I was doing. So when you do I already had a commercial driver's license, but there's 3 parts to that you have to take for the test. There's on the written, you got to take a written test again. So one of those is you do a written test that talks about the highway stuff and this and like, I don't need that. Then it talks about air brakes, and I'm like, I can figure that out. And then it talks about passengers. I'm like, I drove a bus for our church, so I know how to do this. So I went, and you take 3 sections of it. I took the first one, failed it. Took the second one, failed it. Took the third one, failed it. I failed all 3 parts of the test. And I'm like, oh man, I got to go home and open a book. I went home and opened the book, and everything that I missed was right there. It was right there. And if I would have just read it, I would have passed it the first time. I went back and did it the second time, and I passed it. I think I missed maybe 1 question the second time because I read the instructions, and everything I needed to know was right there. But the first time I went, I don't need that. Being impulsive leads us to mistakes. And we make mistakes, and sometimes mistakes are costly. Fortunately, I got to go back and just make it up. But some things in life we don't get to make up. Sometimes speed also leads us to making wrong assumptions. Wrong assumptions about people. Have you ever had a moment where you met somebody and you thought, oh, this is what this person was like, and then as you get to know them, you're like, oh, that's not who they were at all. They're totally different than that. Speed makes us get to wrong conclusions or wrong assumptions all the time. In 2 Samuel 10:1-3, there's a story here. I like this. It actually goes on further than this, but I'm just going to read the introduction. In the course of time, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded the king. David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David's men came to the land of the Ammonites nobles said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David is honoring your father by sending these men to you to express his sympathy? Hasn't David sent them to you to explore the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? So the story goes on from here that Hanun listens to these guys. And if you go back and you read the story of David, you'll find out that he spent some time here in this land, and the king actually helped him. The king was kind to him. And so when David said he was sending somebody out here to express his sympathy, he really did like the guy. But this now new king, he listens to his advisors, and he's convinced that these guys are coming as spies. So what does he do? Whenever they show up, he takes these guys, he shaves off half of their beard and leaves the other half. And then their robes that they're wearing, he cuts them off right about here and sends them home butt naked. And so he utterly humiliates them and sends them home like that. And so when David hears about it, he is infuriated, and he goes to war against these guys. And he wipes out thousands of their soldiers because of that. So this guy made an assumption that these guys are coming as spies, and because of that, his kingdom was wiped out. His kingdom was destroyed because of a bad assumption. Now, in my house, we have a story that goes back several years ago. Annie, I'm going to embarrass Annie here. Annie at the time was, I think, probably 6, maybe 7 years old. And to understand this story, one of the things you have to understand is my wife loved crab legs. She loves crab legs. In fact, just for her birthday, where did she want to go? She wanted to go to Red Lobster to get some crab legs. And so we went to Red Lobster and got crab legs. Well, I don't remember even what it was that we were cooking, but one day Cindy was cooking something, and we sit down at the table to eat, and Annie suddenly shouts out, "Oh, this smells like crap." And I'm like, "What? What'd you say?" And I'm about to launch over the table and pull her bottom down and give her a good swacking, because here she is saying words she shouldn't be saying in our house. But fortunately, Cindy was there, who is the voice of calm in our house sometimes. And she said, hold it. Annie, what were you saying? And Annie says, well, you know those things that Mom likes to cook and eat? She was saying crab. But man, it sure sounded like a different word to me. Because I made a wrong assumption, she almost got her hind end tanned because of my assumption. Fortunately, it didn't happen, but I was about Thanks, Mom, for saving me. Speed leads to bad assumptions, bad conclusions, and bad choices. And then beyond that, speed leads to frustration. In 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 14, it tells about how King Saul lost his throne, and it was all because of frustration. It starts off, it says, he waited, this is talking about King Saul, he waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come till Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings, and Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived. And Saul went out to greet him. And Samuel says, what have you done? He asked Samuel. Saul replied, when I saw the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. You acted foolishly, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command. So here Saul was. Samuel said he was going to show up on this day. And Saul's kind of looking, and now his guys are starting to get discouraged. Some of them are going back home. Some of them are going to another country, the Bible actually says, because they want to get out of here because they know the bad guys are coming. And they're leading. So Saul is sitting here thinking, where in the world is Samuel? Where in the world is Samuel? He's getting frustrated because Samuel and his army's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Lord of the Rings. We just went through a marathon, Lord of the Rings. And right at the beginning of the very first movie, there's a scene. Frodo goes out and he sees Gandalf coming in his cart. And he jumps up in the cart and he says, Gandalf, you're late. And Gandalf says, a wizard is never late. Samuel knew what time he was going to show up because God showed him. One of the things we think sometimes is that God is late. Because God doesn't do things the way that we want him to do things. And we decide that God's late, so sometimes we take things into our own hands. Because we get frustrated when it's not playing out the way that we think it should play out. So we decide to jump in. And guess what? Every time that we do that, we mess it up. When we take over, we are not God. We are not God. God's way is the right way. And God is never late by his standards. By our standards, he's late all the time. But by his standards, God knows when he needs to come through. We don't see that. So when we see these things going on, we get frustrated sometimes. And then the inevitable happens up because we just can't wait for God's time, so we take over. And we make mistakes. When Saul did that, it cost him the kingdom. God rejected him as king. So going too fast leads us to make all kinds of errors, all kinds of mistakes. We go too fast to do it right. Another thing that happens when we go too fast is we go too fast to hear. We go too fast to hear. In life, sometimes I don't know if you've ever been like this. My wife knows me really well, but sometimes you get busy doing something, and somebody will talk to you, and you'll be like, yeah. And my wife knows now that if she wants me to hear her, she's got to stop me and say, look at me and listen, because I'll be like, yeah, and 5 minutes later, you remember when I said this? You said that? I don't remember that. Because we're so busy, so focused on one of our things today that we don't hear. We may hear the sound, but it doesn't sink inside of us. And that's one of the biggest problems with the world that we live in today. We live in a world that is so fast-paced, so busy, so much junk just going on, and sometimes it's not even important stuff. We get just so wrapped up in our own little things. We're so busy with that we're just not listening to what's going on. There's a great story that happens with Elijah. After Elijah went up on the Mount Carmel, he had this incredible showdown up there, this great victory. And then the next day, when Jezebel says, okay, you did this, now I'm going to come and get you. He's like, oh, and he goes a-running. He goes high, and he's like, oh, God, she's going to hurt me. And he goes out and he hides. And finally, God says, I'm going to talk to you. So in 1 Kings 19, 11 through 12, it says, the Lord says, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rock before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And that's when God spoke. That's when God spoke. You see, that's how God speaks to us. I've heard some pastors say that God's a gentleman. He doesn't force himself upon us. He just talks quietly. He talks quietly. And to hear when somebody's talking quietly, you've got to be quiet. Because there's all this other noise is going on. All this other noise of life is going on. And what it does is it drowns out the voice of God. So when we get busy with life, when we get busy doing so much junk, we can't hear God. Some people say, why don't I ever hear God in my life? Because you're not listening. God is speaking all the time. God has never stopped speaking to us. It's just that we're not listening. We're busy with playing our games, with our jobs, with our families, with just playing life. And we don't listen. So going too quickly steals us of hearing from God. And the last one I want to kind of mention here is that going too quickly, sometimes we get so fast, we just simply can't stop. We start racing down the road, and we can even see the troubles coming, and by this time we've got going so fast that we can't stop ourselves. In Proverbs 1, 15 through 16, it says this, my son, do not go along with them, talking about fools. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into sin. They are swift to shed blood. Their feet rush into sin. Sometimes we get going so fast that we are flying right towards sin. We get moving towards it, and even when with the warning signs start coming up, we can't even slow down because we are going so fast. We are rushing right down the path to sin. And it is ripping us apart. It is deadly. So this is where God sets up guardrails. He sets up guardrails in our life. And the Bible is full of guardrails. And I'm going to ask the praise team to start making their way forward. Because I've got just a couple scriptures I want to wrap up with here. Because God lays out some guardrails to protect us from these things. And one of them goes back to the very 10 commandments. The first 2 commandments are, you shall have no other gods before me. You shouldn't use my name in vain. The third commandment is this. In Exodus 20, verses 8 through 10, it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien living within your gates. In other words, stop and rest. Stop and rest. Stop and rest. And one of the things, as Jesus, we get into the New Testament, people had built this whole big, huge religion about this, that, the Sabbath is sacred and holy unto the Lord. Well, one of the things that they're forgetting is that the Sabbath wasn't made to restrict us. It was made to help us, because in Mark 2:27, Jesus points this out. He says, he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the whole reason that God put that here for us is to help us out. It wasn't put here to restrict us, to say you can't do this. And I want you to realize something. The Sabbath isn't about Sunday, or frankly, Saturday, really. It's not about that. It's about a state of heart. And it's about a state of just saying, I got to stop. I've got to slow down. I've got to come to a rest. We need to have time for rest in our lives. But one of the problems is, Satan's really good at taking the things of God and twisting it. And one of the things that's happened in our society now is that everybody lives for the Sabbath, or for the weekend. In fact, in the 80s, there was a song about it saying everybody's working for the weekend, because we want to get to the weekend so that we don't have to work, so we can go out and play all the time. Do you realize that's not what the Sabbath is about? It's not about seeing how much we can fit into one weekend, into our day of rest. The Sabbath is about resting and spending time with God. It's not about how much fun we can. It's about spending time with God. Because in Psalm 46:10, it brings it all together. This is the whole point. This is the whole reason for all this. It says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So this is what it's all about. The ultimate guardrail against all this speed stuff is being still. Being still and recognizing who God is. Being still and being in His presence. Being still and talking to Him and listening to Him. Be in communication with Him. One of the greatest and most important things that we can do in our life is just to stop. Get off the roller coaster for a while. Get off the treadmill. Get off the racetrack and just stop and be quiet and just say, God, I just want to listen to you. I just want to listen to you. So intentionally setting up a time in my life, in my week, where I can stop and just spend time in God's presence. Read my Bible, pray, and listen. Listen. Because otherwise, the speed is going to build up, and it's going to build up, and it's going to build up, and it's going to build up. And we are going to crash. We are going to crash. It leads to disasters unless we stop. So today, the worship team is going to lead us in a worship song. And I just want to spend a few minutes here together just to put this into a little bit of practice. One of the things you got to realize is that you don't have to stop and spend weeks in God's presence. You just need to stop and spend time in God's presence. Now, that may be 10, 15 minutes some days. Some days it may be a half an hour. It's whatever you can spend just so that you can hear from Him. And if you stop before you heard from Him, then you stop too soon. That is one of the most important things. It's about listening to God and making contact, communicating with Him. So today, as the worship team leads us, I'm going to encourage you. You can either spend some time lifting up your hand and praising God and singing along with us on the song, or you can just, where you're at, just spend time just talking to God. Or if you want to, you can come up to our altars here and kneel down and talk to God. And if you need somebody to share with you, reach over to one of the people sitting near you or around you and just say, hey, will you pray with me? Because we have people here that believe in praying with you. So the worship team's going to lead us for a little bit, and we're just going to spend some time in God's presence today.